Throughout this documentary, you will hear from 3 separate people and their individual ghost encounters. As you watch, notice the similarities between the stories as well as how they differ. After listening to these stories, you can decide for yourself whether or not ghosts are real.
Me and Mr. Adams, he's the director of facilities, we will walk around the campus sometimes. And it was during the summer, no one was here. And we were coming up Cass Hall to Main Hall. And then we came to Main Hall, right before you kind of go up that little ramp. We entered into probably a 3-foot space of freezing air. The reason that is so important is because, number one, during the summertime, we don't run the AC up here.
Okay.
Number two, all the AC that is run is inside the classrooms and all the doors are shut.
So there's no AC going through the
There's
hallways?
there's none.
Okay.
Absolutely none. So if you walk down the hallway, you'll look down the main hall. There's no vents to blow AC. So it was a 3-foot, so we walked through it, and as we walked through it, we forgot what we were talking about, because I looked at him and said, "Did you just feel that?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "We're just gonna keep walking." And we just kept walking.
Oh, goodness.
So the second one that I have is, I used to have an assistant here. She assisted both Mr. Adams and myself. Her name was Mrs. Woodward. And Mrs. Woodward was primarily, her office was in the facility shop. So she would come up here, and it was a spring day, and I had my blinds open more than they are right here. And she said, "Oh, hey, I didn't realize you were busy." And she kept on walking. I was just in my office working. And then she went to the mailroom, and then she came back, she goes, "Oh, who was that was in here?" I said, "What are you talking about?" She said, "Augie, there was somebody on the side of your chair just kind of watching, I thought you two were talking about something. There's no one in here."
And she swears she saw someone?
She saw it. It was a female.
Oh my goodness. That just gives me the chills.
Yeah.
Oh.
So, yeah.
Wow.
So, yeah. You know that, I don't know how many people know this or not, but in the FFC, there was a cemetery there, and we had to remove that. Were you aware of that?
I thought it was over by the softball field, but...
No, it was right there, and we actually had to remove, I think it was two nuns and a priest, maybe. Yeah. And then, whenever we started a new building over here, we actually found a headstone from 1857. But no body, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
But those are two of my stories, but there's many, many more. There are several places on the school that I will not go at night, or if I have to come in the early morning, I will not go down the library hall.
Okay, why?
It just weirds me out. I have a feeling about it. I mean, I just will not go down it. Even if I had to go down the other side, I would literally walk all the way around. It's weird because I heard it put best. It's like the FFC in Hager is like the safe area. Like if you want to come in to experience something, you come in on this side,
Right,
the older part.
Oldest.
I won't go down Main Hall, and I won't go up to 200.
Oh, I would never go up there.
Yeah, I won't go up to 200. We used to have someone here, Miss Beasley. I don't know if you remember her or not, but Miss Beasley, she's an alum. And she heard somebody upstairs, and it was just me and her, and like she just got to work. I said, "There's no one here, Jenny. It's just us."
I just had my conversation with Mr. Trevino, the campus security guard, and while he did tell me 2 of his ghost encounters on video, he told me one right after I had ended the video. And in my opinion, this one was the most interesting. So I'm gonna just go ahead and tell it now off of what he told me. So whenever the fire alarm goes off, him and someone who used to be here, Mr. Adams, would have to come in whenever the fire alarm went off when nobody was in the school. And so one day the fire alarm went off at around 3 a.m. in the morning. Mr. Trevino was out of town, so Mr. Adams had to come in. Mr. Adams did not know that Mr. Trevino was out of town. He was expecting Mr. Trevino to show up there with him. So he goes inside to the boiler room, which is where there's a fire alarm panel that tells where the fire alarm first went off, so where the fire would have originated. On this specific occasion, it said that it was in Main Hall. So Mr. Adams walked up to Main Hall, and from Cass Hall went back around and started walking from around the Dean of Students office up towards the front white doors. So as I didn't know, and most people probably don't know, there's actually a catwalk directly above the main hallway. So Mr. Adams says that every time he took a step, there was a step above him on the catwalk area. So Mr. Adams was like, Mr. Trevino's here, Mr. Trevino's here, he's just messing with me. So he calls Mr. Trevino and he's like, haha, I know you're here above me, come on, I got it, you got me, haha. And Mr. Trevino says, I'm out of town, I have no idea what you're talking about, you are the only person in the building. So Mr. Adams is like, oh, that's very odd. So he continues to walk up from the Dean of Students office towards room 111. And he's walking, and every step he takes, there's a step above him. It's steps, you know, as long as he goes, there's a step above him. So he goes into room 111, and the light's on, and all the lights should have been off. So he goes in, he's like, I guess the teacher just forgot to turn the light off. He turns the light off. Right after he turns the light off, he shuts the door and starts walking back towards the Dean of Students office, where the whole light panel is. So then he turns back around to turn the entire lights off to leave. And he turns around, and the light for 111 is back on. So he walks back up there. He's like, there must have been motion sensors on, whatever, I'll just turn it back off. So he goes back, opens the door, turns off the light, waits to make sure it wasn't the motion detector, make sure that it actually will stay off this time. He waits, it stays off, so he walks back. Same thing, turns back around once he gets to the Dean of Students office, and the light's back on. So he goes back. So he just says, okay, this is freaky. He goes back, turns off the light one more time, goes back to the Dean of Students office, it's on again. He says, I'm out of here, turns off all the lights in the hallway, goes outside, and as he's driving around the rotunda, he looks into room 111, and as he's looking in, the lights turn back off. Nobody else is in the building. So first you have the catwalk, footsteps above him, okay? Then lights turn on and off. He's not controlling it. All he's doing is turning them off. They turn back on by themselves. So that was one of the other stories that Mr. Trevino told me, and I thought that one was the most freaky. There are a lot of ghost stories surrounding Ursuline as a whole, those being only a few of them. Now we will hear from two other people about their separate ghost encounters aside from Ursuline as a community.
I was in my 20s, and I lived in Corpus Christi, but I was spending the night with a friend of mine in Houston. He lived in the old section of Houston, Bel Air, and he lived in a very old house, and I was sleeping in one bedroom. And it's not a real scary story, but I was there for hours trying to go to sleep, couldn't go to sleep. I felt the room get very cold. I felt the overwhelming feeling that there was someone in the room with me. And simply put, I've never felt that before unless there was someone in the room with me. And it disturbed me so much that I gave up trying to sleep. I went in the living room and slept on the couch and fell right to sleep.
I used to work at a school that was built in 1893, and I am a scientist, so I of course am a skeptic. When I go ghost hunting, the idea is to find a rational explanation for what's happening, but there were a couple of things that happened at that particular school that I am not sure that I have a rational explanation for. And one of those, I was a senior sponsor, and so I would work late a lot at night. And one time I was down in the bottom part of the school, and I was working by myself, and then I heard footsteps and whistling coming down the hall, and I could hear it approaching the door, and I was like, oh, okay, I don't know who that is. So I went to the door to see who it was, and there was no one there, right? And the footsteps stopped at the door. Mm-hmm. And so, and it was one of those things where it got louder. I mean, you could clearly hear someone coming down the door, or coming down the hall to the door. And the next day, when I asked about it, they said that it was the caretaker who was there in the 80s, and he had passed away. So this was in the late 90s. And so it was in the 80s, had passed away, and had been there for like the last 15 years. And almost everybody at the school had a story, and that was not the only time that happened. I heard him whistle multiple times staying there after dark. So I do not have an explanation for it. It was an actual tune. It was a recognizable tune. Most footsteps, most whistling has some sort of, well, footsteps are usually creaking and things like that, or animals. Whistling is generally drafts and water, temperature changes, stuff like that. But this was a discernible tune matching the footsteps, and it really, really sounded like someone walking. So I don't know the explanation for that.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yep.
So were you the only person on campus?
I was the only person on campus. When I walked out of the parking lot, I was the only car there. I actually walked the first time when it happened, I actually walked around the whole school. What was interesting about the school is that it had been damaged by a tornado in the 80s, and they didn't have enough money to fix the whole school, and so they cannibalized the 3rd and 4th floors to repair the 1st and 2nd floors, and so you heard all kinds of stuff all the time. There were always noises, doors would randomly open and close, but it had to do with the fact that the 3rd and 4th floors were completely open, and the building was very, very old and had very poor insulation, and so there were all sorts of haunted things. And I managed to debunk every single one of them, except the whistling and the footsteps.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So, yeah.
Mhm.
But yeah, and so I got used to it. I heard it probably 5 or 6 times. I was there for 2 years, and
Would
I
it
heard
not
it probably
scare
5 or
you?
6 times. You know, it's interesting because you think the first time it did. I was very puzzled and a little bit nervous. The second time, after having conversation, everyone said that he was a wonderful gentleman, and that he loved the school and he loved everybody there, and he just never left. And so there was nothing. You didn't feel frightened. There was nothing scary about it. And so it was kind of interesting because usually, but the first time I was a little bit nervous. So the first time definitely was startling,
I would
if
be so
nothing else.
scared. Do you have any other ones?
Yeah. Not from that school. I did live in a building. I lived in Boston for a long time, and I did live in a building where the first floor, the laundry was in the basement, and so you'd come down the back stairs, and there was a door directly across from the stairwell, and you felt an overwhelming sense of fear and dread, and everyone did. And somebody actually moved into the basement apartment next door to this like creepy, just, I mean, it was gutted and there was stones, the floor was torn up, and people moved in next door to it, and they actually installed a light in the room. And had it on all the time. They installed an extra light in the hall, and so it seemed to be not just me and my roommate, it seemed to be everyone there. And then my last good story is from Edinburgh. And so we were in the Covenanters prison, my husband and I, and we were on a ghost tour, because we take ghost tours everywhere we go, because I love some ghosts, even though they're questionable at best. But they're fun stories, and we were in the Covenanters prison, which is the whole cemetery, Greyfriars churchyard, is reputed to be one of the most haunted places in the world. And so there are a lot of ghost stories which have totally rational explanations, creepy, but rational explanations. But we were in the Covenanters prison, and we were in one of the tombs, which our little group was in there. And it was completely dark, and there is a sense of this overwhelming sadness when you are there. I mean, it's almost as if it's recorded into the very land that it sits on. And so that's kind of an interesting thing. But if you know the history, that's totally explainable, because it's horrific, right? So we're in there, though, and we're listening to the tour and all this good stuff. And they had already done their jump scare, so everybody was, relaxed and nervous. And I kept feeling the hair. I had longer hair. And I kept feeling my hair moving in the back. So I thought, well, it's just a breeze, right? It's not a big breeze in here, but it's explainable, right? And then I felt a scratching on the back of my jacket, right? And so I just figured there was a guy in there that kept, doing things to be annoying and scaring people around him. So I just figured it was him. And I turned around, and we were the last people in the tour. There was no one behind us. And I thought, okay, it's my imagination, but my husband had heard it. He actually heard the scratching on the back of my jacket, and he looked over at me when it happened. And then we talked about it later, and he said, yeah, I heard that. And so he thought I was just being restless. So that was an interesting thing as well.
Wow.
So.
We see many of the same general narrative tropes throughout these stories. For example, lights turning on and off, footsteps, sounds, old buildings, and more. Ghost stories have a lot in common most of the time, but they can also differ in the way that they show up. Some ghosts show up in the flesh, while other ghosts show themselves through sounds and events. With all of these stories and information, it is now time for you to decide. Are ghosts real or fake?